In the 8th century, in a world lit only by fire and faith, one man stood alone in a dark stone room and asked a question no one had ever thought to ask before. Not a question about God, not a question about war, not a question about power or land or glory, a question about matter itself, about what things are truly made of, about whether the world beneath the surface, the world of elements and reactions and invisible forces, could be understood, could be mapped, could be controlled. His name was Jabir ibn Hayyan, and the room he stood in, the small, dark, fire-lit room that smelled of minerals and smoke and years of patient work, was about to become the most important room in the history of human knowledge. His laboratory was unlike anything that had ever existed anywhere on Earth. Clay vessels of every size lined the stone shelves, glass flasks imported at great cost from distant cities, minerals gathered from across the known world, some rare, some dangerous, some that had no name yet because no one had ever isolated them before. Dried herbs hung from the ceiling. Metals sat in careful rows on the workbench. And in the corner, a furnace, always burning, never cold. He had been working for days without sleep. His robe was stained. His hands were marked. The city outside was quiet, and the empire was vast and glorious and filled with poets and generals and merchants and kings. But none of it existed for him right now. None of it. Only the vessel, only the reaction, only the question burning inside him, louder than the furnace itself. He had failed hundreds of times before, more than hundreds, and he had documented every single failure in careful, precise handwriting, every measurement, every proportion, every temperature, every outcome, because he understood something that no philosopher before him had ever truly understood. Failure is not the opposite of discovery. Failure is the discovery. Every reaction that went wrong told him something valuable. Every explosion that scattered ash across the floor taught him a boundary. Every residue left in a vessel was a clue. Every unexpected color was a message from nature. He was not guessing. He was not hopping. He was listening with the patience of a man who had decided that he would not stop until nature answered. And on this night, for the first time, it did. What he held in his hands that morning was a purified crystalline substance, not found in the ground, not pressed from a plant, not inherited from a Greek text or passed down through generations of folk medicine, created through a process he had designed himself, refined himself, failed at and rebuilt and refined again until it worked, isolated, controlled, repeatable by anyone who followed the same steps. For the first time in human history, a man had not just discovered a substance. He had manufactured one, in a laboratory with his own hands, following a method that could be written down and taught and used again and again. Chemistry had just been born into the world, and its father had not slept in 3 days. He walked through the empty streets of Kufa that morning carrying his discovery as if carrying something sacred. Both hands wrapped around the sealed clay vessel, steps careful and deliberate. No one could have known that this quiet man walking slowly through the dust of an early morning street was carrying in his hands something that would still be changing lives 1,000 years later. Prince Salar had seen many men come before him with claims of greatness, men who said they had discovered secrets, men who claimed they could produce gold from copper or cure any disease or predict the future from the stars. He had learned over many years to listen with his eyes rather than his ears, to watch how a man moved, how he held his vessel, how he spoke about what he had done, whether there was humility alongside the confidence. And when he watched this quiet man with permanently stained hands open that sealed vessel and demonstrate without fanfare what was inside, the composure of a powerful man quietly dissolved. Something in the prince's face changed, because this was not philosophy. This was not poetry dressed up as science. This was real. This was repeatable. This was something the world had never seen, and he knew it immediately. With the prince's full support, everything changed. The laboratory expanded into rooms that had once been used for storage. New furnaces were built. Shelves rose from floor to ceiling along every wall. Equipment arrived by cart from workshops in Baghdad and Basra and from traders who had come from even further away. New materials, new tools, new possibilities that had not existed the week before. And Jabir, with all of this now available to him, turned his full attention to something that would become perhaps his greatest single contribution to the history of science: distillation, the process of separating substances from each other through the precise application of heat and the careful collection of cooled vapor. It sounds simple when you say it in a single sentence. It was not simple. It had never been done with this level of control and intention and documented precision. And when the first pure drop of distilled liquid fell from the curved tip of that glass tube into the small vessel waiting below it, 600 years of future science were born in that single, silent moment. He took on a student not long after, a young man who arrived at the laboratory door one morning holding a letter of introduction and looking as though he was not entirely sure he had found the right place, nervous in the way that truly intelligent young people are nervous, eager in a way that could not be performed or faked, completely overwhelmed on that first morning by the heat and the smell and the sheer strangeness of everything around him. Jabir did not comfort him with gentle words. He did not sit him down and explain the history of everything. He simply handed him a vessel, pointed to the workbench, and said one word: watch. Because Jabir understood something that is still true today: that knowledge cannot simply be handed to another person like an object. It can only be witnessed, and then attempted, and then failed at, and then attempted again differently. Not everyone celebrated what he was building. There were scholars in the courts and libraries of the empire who had built their entire reputations on the ancient Greeks, on Aristotle and his categories, on Plato and his forms, on philosophical frameworks that described the natural world in beautiful, elegant language, but had never once been tested against reality, never proven with an experiment, never confirmed by anything other than the authority of the man who first wrote them down. And here was this quiet man in his stone room with his furnace and his stained hands and his hundreds of notebooks, making those ancient beautiful ideas look like what they were: stories, intelligent stories, but stories without proof. His rivals were not stupid. The most dangerous among them was intelligent enough to understand exactly what Jabir had accomplished, and powerful enough to feel deeply threatened by it. The court session was formally presented as a review, a discussion among scholars, not a trial, but the atmosphere inside that vast room that day carried the full weight of a trial in every detail except the name. Jabir stood alone in the center of the floor. The scholars arranged themselves on both sides in rows like walls. The vizier watched from his raised seat with an expression that revealed nothing, and Jabir was completely still, no visible preparation for defense. No performance of confidence or humility, no fear anywhere on his face or in his posture, because he had already understood something that every person arranged against him in that room had failed to understand. The truth of what he had done did not need him to argue for it. It did not need powerful friends or persuasive language or political support. It simply needed time, and time was the one thing he was entirely willing to give it. Walked back to his laboratory that same night, without anger, without bitterness, without the need to speak to anyone about what had just happened. He walked in, lit the furnace from the embers that had been banked low in his absence, opened a fresh manuscript to a clean page, and began again, because that had always been his answer to everything the world put in front of him. Not words, not arguments, not politics or alliances or the careful management of powerful people's opinions. Work. More work, deeper work. Work that asked better questions than the ones he had asked the day before. Work that would outlast every single person who had sat in that room today, every court, every empire, every rival who had ever crossed their arms and decided that what they could not understand must therefore be wrong. He was not racing against them. He had never been racing against them. He was racing against time itself, against the limit of a single human life. And he intended to use every moment of what remained. The manuscripts grew into hundreds of volumes over the years, shelf after shelf of documented knowledge, chemical processes recorded with a level of precision and detail that the world had never seen before and would not see again for centuries. Distillation, crystallization, calcination, evaporation, sublimation, filtration, the isolation of acids, the documentation of reactions between substances, the creation of the first systematic approach to experimentation in human history. Processes that every chemist and every pharmacist and every materials scientist and every doctor on Earth still uses today in the same fundamental form, following the same logic, building on the same foundations. Foundations that a single man with permanently stained hands and a furnace that never went cold laid down in a dark stone room in the city of Kufa, 1400 years ago. In the Grand Library of Baghdad, years later, a foreign scholar sat at a desk copying one of Jabir's diagrams carefully into his own manuscript. He did not know the name of the man who had first drawn that diagram. He did not know his city or his century or the story of the long nights it had taken to arrive at those precise measurements. He knew only what the diagram showed him, that it described a process with perfect clarity, that it had been tested and proven, that it worked, that it was true. And somewhere behind him, moving quietly along the shelves of that vast library, Jabir walked and ran his fingers slowly along the spines of manuscripts, and without the foreign scholar knowing, stopped and watched a complete stranger carry his life's work forward into a world he would never see, and said nothing, because nothing needed to be said. Empires change. Caliphs grow old and are replaced by sons who are replaced by their own sons. Courts that once felt permanent dissolve into memory within a generation. The faces of power shift like the surface of a river, always moving, never the same twice. But Jabir ibn Hayyan outlasted all of them, not because he held political power, not because he had the protection of an unbroken line of patrons, but because what he had built could not be unbuilt. Because knowledge, once it is written down clearly and tested and proven and documented for anyone who knows how to read, cannot be made not to exist. He had understood this from the very beginning. It was the deepest reason behind every manuscript, every measurement, every carefully labeled vessel, so that even if every court turned against him, even if every rival succeeded, even if his name was forgotten entirely, the work would remain, the work would speak, and the work would win. On his last night in the laboratory, he did not write. He did not set up a new experiment or reach for a fresh vessel or open a manuscript to a clean page. He simply pulled a chair close to the furnace and sat and watched the fire. The same fire in principle that had been burning in that room since the very beginning. The same light that had been present at every discovery, every late night. Every moment of doubt when the experiments refused to work and the answer seemed further away than ever. Every moment of sudden clarity when everything aligned and the universe revealed one more small piece of its hidden order. He watched it for a long time, and the fire burned steadily, the way it always had, with no awareness of what it had witnessed. And then, he closed his eyes. The father of chemistry, the man who replaced belief with evidence and philosophy with experiment. The man who taught the world how to ask questions with its hands, Jabir ibn Hayyan, a legend.
God is the greatest.
God is the greatest.
I bear witness that there is no deity but God.